Hello, I'm Mario Joyner, Vice President and Small Business Sales Administrator for Nevada State Bank. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar where we'll be discussing the Nevada State Bank 2015 Small Business Survey. We'll talk about what Nevada business people think about issues before the legislature currently, including taxes, minimum wage, the Affordable Care Act, and other hot topics. The webinar is presented by Nevada State Bank through nevadasmallbusiness.com. We're excited to have with us one of Nevada's leading experts on economic data, Jeremy Aguero. He is a principal analyst with Applied Analysis, who's often called upon to provide economic data and to help us understand what the numbers mean. He's also one of our board of directors at Nevada State Bank. He has testified before the legislature on several issues this session and can give us an update on what's happening there. His firm conducted the Small Business Survey, and we'd like to welcome Jeremy at this time and spend as much time as you'll give us on the legislation. But I'll just reference what folks can find in the actual survey itself, and then I'll allow you to kind of bring us up to speed with what's currently happening. This is very topical and will be of interest to everyone statewide and outside of the state as well. So the first just talked about the Affordable Care Act, got a lot of attention last year, still continues to get attention now. And the question was raised about the implementation and whether or not it's positively or negatively impacted them. And those that were surveyed, about 53% said it's negatively impacted them. About 38% said at this point there's been no impact. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what you're hearing, survey included, but outside, are you hearing the same kinds of?
Yeah, look, I mean, for those businesses that have had to go through the process of increasing their cost, that have actually seen the increase in cost of health insurance as a result of the Affordable Care Act, of course, those are the ones that are going to tell you that it's negative. Of course, many small businesses fall underneath the threshold and so aren't so much affected, although their employees are affected, right? Because now they're mandated to go out and have health insurance. At the end of the day, the Affordable Care Act for many businesses is the only word I can use for it is confusing. They're just not sure. They're unsure whether they're complying properly, what they need to do, what they don't need to do. And there's folks out there to get them some help relative to that. But I think what we saw more in the small business survey than anything else was that the idea of having to mandate health insurance, the idea of having to provide it, was generally viewed as a negative from a business's standpoint. It was viewed as something that was going to negatively impact them, right? The other side is what we saw is that they're just not sure if they're doing it right or not. And that's going to be the next 5 years. That's not going to be anything that's easy. We know what the president and legislature and Congress put into place. And now we have to live with it, and we're finding the best ways to try and make that happen. It's slow, it's steady, sometimes it's painful for businesses, particularly we hear more than anything else is about a 30% increase in premiums associated with companies that are forced to comply. It's a pretty big chunk of gross revenue when you're thinking about that increase in healthcare.
Do you think it was more that the decision to have it or not have it was kind of taken away from them? You think that's what precipitated some of the negative connotation around it?
To be honest with you, most of what I hear is it's just about the cost, right? That it's really a financial consideration. People understand that they want people to have health care. They don't want people to be excluded from health care for some silly pre-existing condition. They want that a child who's going to school should be able to be covered into perpetuity. They don't want people to be left out. I mean, I think both of us probably know people that have gone through some type of negative healthcare experience, and it's ruined them financially. That's awful. No, we wouldn't wish that on anybody as a business owner, or frankly just as a human being. We wouldn't wish that on anybody. The problem comes in where, particularly as the economy was at its worst, we have businesses are just holding on, and now you layer on this beast that we don't know exactly how it works. We don't know whether we're complying fully or not. Many small businesses were already providing health care. Did they have to do it differently than they were before? Did they have to pay for more of it? How are their employees going to participate in that? It became, it was an extra layer of stress and expense that was just hard for many business owners. And let's be honest, a lot of business owners are good at being doctors. They're good at being mechanics. They're not necessarily being good at business people, right? They're very skilled in some areas. And so when you bring something like this on, it it'd be a stressful event for a small business person.
Yeah, and also too, I was just giving thought to, another hot topic, at least here in Nevada, was the margins tax, of course. And of course, last year doing the survey, a lot hadn't even heard of it, wasn't aware of it, particularly the impact to them as a business owner. So obviously there was a lot of education and a lot of information surrounding that, and so it was unsuccessful in its attempts. And obviously you were, from my perspective, had a lot to do with the education around it and allowing a business owner to make an informed decision about which way they voted, and not telling them what to do, but just providing great information. So I applaud you and appreciate that, because it exposed a lot of how it was fundamentally flawed. I think that's the word that was used most often as it related to it. So it was good to know now that 75% of those who actually have seen that take its course felt like it was the right decision, was not to have that go through. So not only were they educated, but also there's not buyer's remorse. They felt like it was a great decision to make. And I know there's talk, and maybe you can expound upon some of the conversations around what they're going to do now. So that didn't pass. So if there's any conversation about what may be coming online that you know of that you could tell us, please.
Sure. So there's a lot going on up in Carson City. So I'll try to work through each component part, and then you can let me know if I run astray. The small business survey was pretty insightful relative to how people were going to vote. I don't think anybody sort of expected an 80-20 vote against question 3, sometimes referred to as the education initiative that was brought forward. For anyone that wasn't aware, that's been living under a rock for the past year, right? This was essentially a 2% tax on margin. It was sometimes referred to as the margin tax. It was brought forward. The genesis of that was actually back in 2011. Some people just don't know that part of it. Matter of fact, 2011, the leaders of the Nevada State Legislature, was a gentleman by the name of Stephen Horsford. He subsequently went on to become a congressman, and then John O'Seguera, who at the time was the Speaker of the Nevada State Assembly. And they convened a number of business owners. These were, sometimes they've been referred to as kind of secret meetings. I don't know that they were really that secret, but they put a bunch of people, business folks, in a room and said, we're struggling here as a state. This is probably back to about 2010. Let's call it September, October 2010. They put a bunch of these business people in a room and said, we've got to figure out how to do something different than what we're doing today. Those business people all got together in that room, and I actually staffed that group. And they spent about 6 months really kind of studying Nevada's tax system. And one of the things that they had a real problem with was the fact that we had a payroll tax in the state of Nevada. You'll recall at that point in time, back in December, we had about a 14.5% unemployment rate at that time. We've talked about in some of these other videos about employment and the economy and all that stuff, so I'm not going to go down that road. But at the end of the day, we had this huge rate of unemployment. And they said, well, look, if we have among the highest rates, I think at the time, by a wide margin, the highest rate of unemployment in the United States, maybe it's not the best form of tax policy to essentially have a payroll tax, the primary form of business tax in the state of Nevada, to have a tax that's solely on payroll. Maybe that's a bad idea. They subsequently go through the process of studying all of these different areas relative to how they tax, everything from corporate income taxes to gross receipts taxes and everything in between, and they settled on one that they thought was relatively fair. This is what has commonly been referred to as the Texas franchise tax, or Texas's gross receipts tax. Now, there's been a lot talked about, and I'll get to question 3 here in just a moment, but at that point, it wasn't intended to generate any additional money. And this is what people kind of forget. It was solely decided that, as part of that group, that this would be good tax policy because we would essentially take a tax that looked more like our economy and replace the payroll tax that we had on the books then. That essentially capital-intensive firms and labor-intensive firms should bear the similar tax liability. That in-state firms, somebody who hired somebody and had employees in the state, shouldn't have to pay higher taxes than somebody who sells something into the state and gets the same advantages. They should actually lower their tax liability. So they proposed essentially a tax rate of something less than 1% that would replace at the time about $365 million a year in terms of the payroll tax that we had in the state of Nevada. For all number of different reasons, Horsford-O'Seguera tax plan goes nowhere. It was introduced kind of late. There was an appetite for it at the legislative session. It kind of dies at that point. The teachers union essentially comes forward with another alternative. They call it this question 3 that you've referred to, or the Teachers Education Initiative. That Teachers Education Initiative was dramatically different than what was originally proposed. They had a rate of 2%, where the proposed rate was less than 1%. There was special treatment for things like healthcare revenue and pass-through revenue and some of these other things that had worked relatively well in the state of Texas that was completely left out. Now, there were things that were good about it, and there were things that are bad, but arguably, what the biggest concern was that this would take us from being about the middle of the pack in terms of business tax liability to probably the 4th or the 5th highest business tax state in the United States. Now, we also talked about economic development a couple of videos ago, but at the end of the day, there was real concern about whether that would make us less competitive as a state. Fast forward now to 2014. Fast forward, the governor, elected to his second term, is faced with something very difficult. And it didn't have anything to do with taxes at that point. He's faced with an education system that is failing, right? There is no doubt about that. Graduation rates, look around us. We all know that our education system needs help. The governor comes forward with the assistance of Dale Urquiaga, who is the head of the State Department of Education. He's essentially the state superintendent. They've been friends, lifelong friends. And they say, we are not going to leave this state without making every effort we can to fix education. They come forward with what they believe to be an incredibly progressive and thoughtful education package. In doing that, they have to find a way to fund it. Very popular governor, recognizing that he wants to fund and fix education, comes forward with a tax package that includes 4 elements to it. One is increasing the cigarette tax by about 20 cents a pack. The second one is increasing the tax on mining, payroll tax on mining. The third one is an increase in the tax for restricted gaming operators. And the fourth one, the one that we talk most about, is this essentially business license fee. Now, we have a business license fee in the state of Nevada. It is $200 per business per year, all of those type of things. Again, the governor comes forward with essentially a new alternative that says, I'm going to start with that business license fee, and I'm going to say that the least a business should have to pay in the state of Nevada is $400. That should be the minimum. And to put $400 into perspective, that's about 5% of the cost of funding one child's education for 1 year in a public school. So again, it felt, I think, relatively fair, $500. Now, that doesn't mean that's not a lot of money for some businesses, particularly startups, but nonetheless, that's where it started. The governor then goes through the exercise of evaluating everything else that's out there. Can we increase or modify the sales tax? Can we change the property tax? What about a corporate income tax? All those type of things. And many of them were taken off the table either because they just can't be done because of a constitutional restriction or because of the complications associated. It was politically not viable to get something like that done. The focus ultimately focuses on that business license fee. The governor said, we can't just raise $400 and apply it to everybody. If we did that, then guys like MGM and NV Energy were paying the same thing as my real estate agent. That doesn't seem very fair. Right. And so they started going through this exercise of bringing all of that forward, right? Saying, what else could we do? We looked at various different tax bases, different business structures, and ultimately it came down to the idea of saying, well, we need to recognize that not all businesses are the same, that sometimes construction businesses are different than healthcare businesses or different than manufacturing businesses, so we need to find some way that treats businesses that are differently. And the governor said, we need to generate $250 million a year from that revenue source. Now, this in and of itself makes it different than certainly question 3. It was going to generate $800 to $850 million a year, so it was substantially smaller than that to start with. Right. But more importantly, what the governor was able to do is essentially restructure that to say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to say that based on how much revenue you generate as a state, there's going to be a fee that you're going to pay as a result of that. And the more revenue you generate, the higher the fee you're going to have to pay, up to a maximum amount for those businesses that make more than about $1.2 billion a year is the capped out amount in that fee schedule. Now, what does that mean? That means that we've got the governor's proposal is essentially a tax that says, okay, it's based on gross revenue. It resolves the looks like the economy problem. It resolves the in-state versus out-of-state problem. It settles the issue with a payroll tax. It says I'm not going to tax somebody solely on an expense. I'm going to tax somebody based on what their sales are like. Well, okay, so it covers that. Legislature takes a look at that. The governor has what is a historic hearing at the state legislature. The governor and 3 past governors all come up in support of the governor's plan and program. Pretty historic and something I've never seen, and I don't think that's ever happened before. I don't know that we ever had that many governors alive at one point, but nonetheless, I don't know that it's ever happened before. Now, another senator in the state Senate brought forward an alternative plan. Says, Governor, we like what you've done. We think you've been thoughtful, but we think that instead of just adding this $250 million, that idea is good enough that we should be replacing that payroll tax, that we should just get rid of it altogether. That was Senator Pat Spearman. She wanted a higher rate. She had some other things. It was a relatively elegant alternative to what the governor said, and they're debating that based on the merits. In addition to that, you've got the Republicans in the Assembly. I know, in a crazy twist of fate, it's all of the Republicans that are bringing these various tax plans, but they've said, you know what, simplicity really matters. And what is really valuable about the tax system that we have today, we respect the fact that there are some inequities associated with it, but what is really valuable is that simplicity. And so they said, what we should really do is increase that payroll tax in order to generate the other $250 million, as well as something on the business license fee, that $200 fee. We should make that $500 for corporations and $300 for partnerships. Now, that's a whole lot of details, and I get that. But what we're really talking about right now is finding the best way for the state of Nevada to fund this education program. And this is the one thing that legislators really agree on. They may not agree on exactly how to do it. They may not agree on the form or the function, but they do agree that we need to fund those schools. And that's what the debate is having. What you've seen is the governor's plan has passed out of the Senate. We'll know by the time this airs whether the assembly plan is passed out of the assembly. And now they'll go forward trying to marshal a compromise in terms of how we make the state's tax system work better and how we get the money we need for education.
Well, the good news there is there's a unified, at least kind of opinion that the objective is consistent. Now it's just a function of how do we create compromise to make it happen. So that's encouraging that it's a conversation that's not contentious. It's very much we're on the same page. Let's just figure out how to get it done. And just from your thoughts, now that it's gone to the assembly, correct?
Yep.
There seems to be just in general early conversation that could be challenging, but it sounds like from what you're telling us that there'll just be some kind of compromise. Something will get done. Is that your thought?
Look, if you were asking me to handicap the state legislature, which is always a very dangerous game, right? I would say, yeah, I think something's going to get done. I really do believe that. When the bills go to the other house, there's going to be vigorous debate. But what you'll find is that debate is more on point and more thoughtful than I can tell you that I've ever seen it, right? Even the gentlemen in the assembly, Paul Anderson and Derek Armstrong, which have brought forward their plan, have brought it forth in completely good faith. The governor has said, if anybody has a better plan, if anybody has an alternative, bring it to the table. Let's evaluate it. Let's look at let's look at how well it works, and let's bring it forward. And that is exactly what folks are doing. And this is, again, a great reflection of who we are as a state, and something that I think business people need to keep a really close eye on. Going back to the survey, we know they're concerned about taxes. We know this is a concern. And I think everybody at the state legislature is concerned about the impact on small businesses. That said, I think we also learned from the survey and from other conversations, business folks are also concerned about employees, quality workforce, and education. Those are things we're going to have to balance.
Well, and that's what will happen. I mean, as a result of kind of fixing this education issue, we'll get better employees, and they'll have actually a better pool of employees to select from, which is something else that we referenced as a concern for the business owner survey. Hopefully we can mitigate that with what will happen in the legislature currently. That obviously is getting a lot of attention, very current. We're talking like hours between this happening. But what other issues up in Carson City should our business owners focus on?
Sure. I think a lot of conversations going on about education itself. Governor has some huge education reforms, so does the state legislature, that are things as dramatic as breaking up the school district into multiple parts. You want to think about something that is going to affect education in your neighborhood? Wait till they break up the school district into multiple districts, and we have to go through that exercise. Funding for programs for kids that have special needs, programs for kids that are gifted. All of those things affect business owners and their families and are going to go through that district. There are also things like minimum wage. You mentioned it in the opening about minimum wage and the discussion there. Business owners have a tendency to be very concerned about minimum wage. I'll be honest with you, finding people that actually earn the minimum wage is pretty tough to do in the state of Nevada. In other states, there's something called, things like tip credits or something along those lines, where if someone earns the minimum wage, that you don't count a tip or a concession or something else, or at least that's calculated into that minimum wage. We don't have that in the state of Nevada. So if somebody earns the minimum wage and they're also earning tips, and maybe those tips are 3 or 4 or 5 times the amount that they're earning in that wage, that's not calculated into that minimum wage. So we have to be a little bit careful about understanding that. There are some areas of the economy, of course, where minimum wage. We've heard a lot of conversations about Walmart recently. We've heard a lot of conversations about fast food recently, trying to get up to what is referred to as a living wage, trying to increase the income equity across the United States. We're hearing more about that. Minimum wage may or may not be the way to actually accomplish that. That said, the legislature is taking up the minimum wage and talking about, some of them are very large increases, which I do think would have a negative impact. Some of them aren't, that big and probably wouldn't have that much of an impact. But what is important is that, allowing the market to be the market, right? Essentially not creating arbitrary regulations, while at the same time not having an entire group of people that cannot live because they have to work 2 jobs to afford rent and food and the other things that they need just for subsistence. That's probably not the right thing either. We have to find some balance there. It's going to be taken up at the national level. It's going to be taken up at the local level. The other thing that's being brought up that I think a lot of business owners have to keep a close eye on is going to be public employee reforms. There's a bill that is sometimes referred to by the unions as the Union Armageddon Bill, right? Which essentially means that there's fear that they're going to essentially break unions up and all of those type of things. But we have some of the most generous programs for retirement and health care anywhere in the country for our public employees. And for many reasons, that was important, particularly when it was really hard to get employees to come. Probably some of that has gone a little further than what it probably needed to. There's talk about shifting from a defined contribution to a defined benefit program. Or vice versa, and essentially, talking about things like health benefits for life and spousal benefits for life, and how much people can get. Anyway, to make a very long story short, there are a number of bills up there that will work to shore up not only raising revenue that we've talked about, but also making government operate a bit more efficiently than it did before. There are bills on home rule, which will mean that local governments would have more power to do some of the things that they want to do. There are bills dealing with other taxes. I mean, things like live entertainment taxes are out there. We may not think about those very often, but the live entertainment tax is a tax that's paid every time you go to a concert or you go to see a show. It's probably the most convoluted tax you can ever imagine. And compliance is pretty hard, right? You go to a lounge and somebody's playing piano, they're going to charge an extra 10% and put it on top of the beer that you have while you're there. That's pretty surprising to some consumers and is out there. There are so many of those things going on at the state legislature, but if we think about taxes and we think about education and we think about things like minimum wage and we think about things like public employee benefits and trying to rein those in over the longer run, I would say those are probably the 4 things that business owners need to focus on more so than anything else.
Wow. Well, obviously this has been great information, and we thank you for all you've contributed for not only the survey, but also helping us to understand the drivers and some of the impact, and more importantly, as it relates to legislature, just what's topical, what's happening, and how, as a business owner, the attention that needs to be placed on not only the most dominant conversation, but also some of the others that could have some impact on their business going forward. So I just want to say thank you again on behalf of Nevada State Bank and NevadaSmallBusiness.com. Thank you for all your contributions there. but I also wanted to let everyone know that if you want to download a free copy of the 2015 Small Business Survey, go to nevadasmallbusiness.com/survey. And if you'd like to see the other videos that we referenced during this conversation and the series about the surveys, you can find them on the webinars page of nevadasmallbusiness.com. And if you'd like to get economic data from Applied Analysis in our monthly economic briefing, sign up to receive our e-newsletter at nsbank.com/newsletter. And again, thank you for joining us and have a great day.